Jack Rolfe, welcome along to the show.
Gareth, thanks for having me. I remember being in the car when you were talking about doing a podcast, and a few months later, here we are. So, yeah, good on you for making it a reality.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast things have evolved. It was actually probably this time last year I was a guest on your show, so it's a real honour to be able to return the favour.
No, grateful for the opportunity, and yeah, cool to be here.
So we first connected a little over a year ago. I was doing some research around coaching tools and some tips and some just looking for some secret sauce, I guess, to help some of the coaches that I help as part of my role here at the club. And I stumbled across MatchPlay Cards, did a little bit of research. I wanted to find out a little bit more, so I slid into your DMs. One thing led to the next, so we caught up through Twitter initially, purchased some of the cards, which we'll talk about shortly, and put them to work. And then you came out not long after to Melbourne and saw the cards in action. So since then, we've stayed in reasonably recent touch. Caught up with a coffee a couple of weeks ago, and here we are.
Magic. Yeah, no, loving the work you're doing.
So before we get onto the coaching lab and match play cards, let's just paint the picture for your background. So predominantly, firstly as a coach through hockey, so field hockey. So yeah, how did that come about?
Yeah, I guess a bit of a different background to you, have a guessed. I haven't played at the elite level, haven't been to Olympics or, been in the Premier League and international scene, and probably had no intention of being a coach. If you asked me 10 years ago, what would you be doing when you're 28? I'd have zero intention of being a coach. And I grew up in the UK. Hockey's traditionally a sport that's played at Hogwarts-like style schools in the UK, and it's normally for the big posh private families. And my mum and dad were definitely not one of those, and nor was I. Went to the most standard sort of school in the world, and I saw this little poster about doing an after-school club. And like every kid in England, you play football to a certain level. I played a bit of football, and I saw this poster, and one day I said to Dad, "I think I'm going to go and play hockey." So Dad picked up the phone, and I joined the club and went down to like a 6 week, I guess, like introduction program. And the coach rang up my dad and said, "Oh, I think Jacko is pretty good. He should, consider signing up for the season." My dad thought he had the wrong child, because I probably wasn't the most gifted sports person in the world. So my dad had a laugh at that one. And the coach said, "No, I think he's got some potential and he should join the club." So joined, and I guess quite quickly went through some different sort of pathways in development and player pathways and bits and bobs, and got to some England selections about 17, 18, and was in and around bits and bobs. And some of my mates went on to play in the Olympics that's happening right now. Others have gone to World Cups and all this sort of stuff. And I didn't get picked, but my coach at the time said, "Jack, I reckon you should do some coaching." And if it wasn't for that coach to say, "Jack, I think you should do some coaching," I definitely wouldn't be here. So spent my early days coaching youngsters, moved to adults, moved to schools, definitely a little bit in the club space, a bit more in the performance space. And then slowly, I guess you quickly learn that coaching is just a skill set that is quite diverse, particularly in invasion game sports, that there's a lot of crossover, and ended up in a few different sports in more recent years in AFL and soccer, football, basketball, mainly in the education space, as well as, yeah, some performance and development pathways.
Yeah, so kudos to that coach to not only spot some talent, but start you off on that journey. We have a little bit of connection with both doing the Bachelors of Sport Coaching at Canterbury University, just different parts of the world. Myself being in Canterbury is in New Zealand, and you Canterbury in England, but Bachelors of Sport Coaching haven't come across many people that have done formalized education in coaching other than the group I went through with. How did you find that?
It really taught me that the coaching was a career. I think when I started coaching, people thought, "Oh, you just do coaching if it's you've got a spare few hours, volunteer your time down the club." But the coach was only really a word associated with, those guys that are full-time working in these top leagues that you see on TV. But that education that gave me at Canterbury Christchurch was, it's a career, and there's much more to it than just putting 11 people on a pitch. It's multidisciplinary. It's pretty much just psychology, right? You would know that as well. It's, those skill sets, it really taught me and upskilled me in how to work with people, how to work with different departments, but also probably gave me a bit of an opening that the difference between teaching and coaching. I had a really nice blend because I had a bit of an education background, so I could come with that concept of blocks of learning and how do people learn, but add that difference, I guess, a little bit with that coaching part into it. And it probably really showed a light that there's not a lot of coaches out there, Gareth. I think, and good coaching is a lottery. And I'd like to think maybe, I was quite gifted with some of the experiences I've had in terms of what I believe is good coaching and what good experiences are. And the more I travel, the more I see that I'm maybe not as fortunate, or sorry, others are not as fortunate as I am in terms of having a good experience with sport because of the coaching experiences they have. So it really just taught me that it's such a powerful thing that yeah, you have to make the most of those opportunities and treat sport and treat coaching as a profession. Whereas I think 15, 20 years ago, it probably was a thing you did if you had a bit of spare time and you're an ex-player and you transitioned into senior coaching. But now coaching's in so many different dynamics.
Yeah, it certainly is. And resourcing around coaches is something I've seen change in my short sort of last 15 years of going down this path myself. You made a really interesting point. So teaching versus coaching. I just wonder if you can dig into what differences you would describe those two as being.
I think if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said there was a big difference. And now I actually think the best coaches are the best teachers and the best teachers are the best coaches. And if you come back to the middle of it, it's about the experience you give and it's about learning. Like learning is in both a teaching environment and in a sports coaching setting. I think where coaches can probably learn a little bit more from teachers is that block of learning. In a teaching environment, you've got one term and you've got 9 weeks to have a real set focus, and maybe you're proactive rather than reactive. Whereas in a coaching world, sometimes we weren't very good at this on a Sunday, so on Tuesday we're going to do this, and every single week over the 8 weeks you've looked at 8 different things, but nothing's came up twice. So that block of learning in teaching would be okay. Here's 2 or 3 things we're going to look at over 8 weeks, and we focus on them. Whereas in that coaching world, sometimes we can be a little bit more reactive and think, yeah, we weren't good at this, we need to do that, and 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes.
Hmm. Let's bring it back to the hockey side of things. When I was a much younger coach, I can't quite recall if I was still doing my bachelor's sport coaching. I quite likely would have been. Um, and I went and spent maybe over the course of a month, not every session and certainly not every game, but a number of different sort of sampling of the Canterbury hockey team, women's team at the time, male coach. So I felt it was quite a lot of similarities. No, it was definitely after my education. I'd come back from the States. I was the Mainland Pride head coach. That's what it was. But I wanted to sort of see some comparisons, and I thought hockey was the most like football that I could find in Canterbury. Invasion game, as you said, I'm trying to score on your goal and try and stop you scoring on your goal. My goal is a rectangular sport. It's a goalkeeper. Obviously, you don't use sticks, but there was quite a lot of similarities, number of players on the pitch. I think the offside rule was different, but a lot of transferable components to the game. Netball was the other one I spent a bit of time in. Obviously, in New Zealand, netball is a huge sport. Again, same principles, right? But a little bit more restrictions around where players can move into and not. So false in that respect. You've now spent a fair bit of time in football, soccer football, as well as your hockey. Am I along the right feeling of there's a lot of similarities, or do you think there's other sports that maybe football or maybe football to hockey would sort of better align with?
No, definitely it's 100% aligned. And, if you put 11 people on a pitch, on a football pitch, you put them in the same formation that you are a hockey team, both in possession and out of possession. So that concept of, positioning for sure is the same. The biggest difference is there's just no offside in hockey. And the other one would be that you can self-pass on free hits. So you can run with the ball, whereas in a free kick, you obviously have to pass that. It's interesting because I look at the best hockey coaches that have been most successful in the most successful hockey countries. They've actually learned so much from the world of football. So I look at the Dutch, and I had the pleasure of speaking to him, Dennis Bergkamp. His daughter plays hockey, and actually Dennis Bergkamp ended up coaching his daughter's team. because of the similarities were so similar. Belgium, that have been incredibly successful in recent years. I know Roberto Martinez, when he was in Belgium coaching the national team, had a big influence on the world of hockey in terms of how the coach structured the training, some of the positioning sort of elements. And I think that's where hockey is a little bit further behind, because it maybe hasn't had those generations of coaches that have been in the jobs full time. So the detail in football is very deep. How your body receive position, the periodization, all those sorts of little finer details that we probably take for granted in football. Hockey hasn't had those for as long. So actually, I think at the moment, hockey is learning more from football than, football's learning from hockey, but there's definitely so much crossover.
So if you take away the me as a coach versus you as a coach, you'll have different beliefs and experiences and education around what good coaching may look like. But I certainly went into the Canterbury hockey women's team with the idea of, how do their defenders defend the zone? How does the wide players exploit space in a flank area? So that's what I wanted to take out, like some specific exercises, drills, game-based kind of constraints, and then test them in my football environment. Have you gone into football? Have you thought through the reverse lens? What are things that you're learning from my game that you can apply into your game if you haven't all?
I think the element of structure, although I love chaos, I think football has a little bit more structure at times in terms, the concept of playing out from the back, that it's very cliche, but everyone talks about it. It's a set piece, right? It's a real focus point and a principle based approach, whereas hockey probably hasn't had that in recent years. And recently, hockey's probably gone very much to a football model of principles. I hear Jose Mourinho talk about it a lot. The principles of play. I actually think probably hockey, we just rocked up and played at times and didn't necessarily have real clear principles of how we want to play in certain areas of the pitch. And I love the football concept of, the clubs I've been grateful enough to go to, that you see the lines across the pitch, so you're creating different zones and what those zones mean, both in possession, out of possession, where you want to win the ball, how many people you want in those areas. Hockey hasn't necessarily had that or got that. So I love that element of detail in terms of what we do in certain areas of the pitch. And hockey can really learn from that, because the left side and the right side in hockey are two completely different concepts. Everyone has to play right-handed. So naturally, the right-hand side in hockey is stronger. That means everyone defends it, but no one really looks to go from right to left very often. And I think hockey can definitely learn from that positional, principle-based approach about how to play in both possession and out of possession.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that one through. It's a really unique constraint to your game, right? So there's no left-handed sticks. Do you know the origin of that rule by chance?
No, I'm way too young to know that. The backhand's definitely come into the game a lot more, but it's a little bit more obvious when somebody's going to play a backhand. So you can kind of see when they're going to drag the ball. So there's an element of predictability about it. But yeah, 80% of the game, 90% of the game is encouraged to be played on that forehand side, because it's the quickest, the fastest way, and the cleanest way to play the game.
Yeah, nice. My big takeaway from that, and I've used that hockey example to a lot of coaches I've been speaking with over the last years, is get yourself outside of your bubble, or even outside of your sport bubble, and go and see what else you can learn from similar sports. So evasion sports would be the starting point, but you can go even further, right? And then look at best practice, how coaches interact with athletes from a culture perspective. I've been really fortunate. I spent the last weekend with Melbourne Storm as a part of my pro license block, and it was similar code in some respects, rectangular field, evasion. The static nature of the line and the repetition of the play the balls before it has to be turned over is different, of course. But I spent the whole week enthralled by the culture of the club, the interactions between staff and staff, and staff to players and players to players. And I was really fortunate, right? Not everybody can just rock up to the Melbourne Storm and go, hey, can I come in for a week? But I think coaches and people in charge of organizations and teams are generally pretty open at having conversations, or come and observe, and certainly come and observe, and then, not only just take from the organization, but feedback. What did you see? Like, quiz me on why I did something, and that kind of helps me as the host entity be able to ratify or clarify my why I'm doing X and Y and Z, but also you as the recipient of, or the guest in the environment, to have a different way of thinking, a different way of seeing things, and then going away and, I guess, coming up with more ideas or more questions, and then go and test them in your own environment.
I think this is one of the best bits about coaching that we probably don't leverage enough, and it's different to education because when you're attached to a school, everyone's in competition, right? It's school v school. But when you're in a coach and you're in an environment, let's take you from Melbourne, for example, that, going into another sport, a different code, you're not going to steal anything to influence a rival. And that experience is so, so valuable. I had the privilege of going to the Fremantle Dockers in pre-season last year, and Justin Longmuir invited me in, and I was really, really grateful because for an English person to go in, and particularly to an AFL environment, it can be quite close. I was quite honoured, and I said, like, why did you invite me in? I was a bit kind of taken back, and he goes, you just have different experiences, and you have a different set of eyes. I've come from a hockey background, which is chaotic, same as AFL, but probably a little bit more structured in certain places and all this sort of stuff. And that experience is so valuable. And he asked me more questions than I probably asked him. But this is really where coaches have a benefit. And one of the earliest things I learned in my coaching when I was really young was someone said, if you don't ask, you don't get. And you've got to make the most of every experience. And I've really taken those two principles and just put it into everything. And probably why we're here right now, and why I get to go to some cool places, just make the most of those experiences. And if you don't ask, you don't get. And also coaching is a pretty lonely place, right? Everyone thinks it's pretty glorious and pretty amazing. You get all this kit and you travel and all this sort of stuff, but there's a lot more behind it. And all the coaches and all the codes have got the same issues, because you're dealing with people. So when you deal with people, you've all got the same issues, just what colour kit you wear is slightly different. So I think that's really where coaches have probably got to come together and almost help each other a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly you're spending a lot of time and energy on that. But just before I get to that, so you mentioned Fremantle. So you're based in Western Australia, in Perth now. Your current role is with Hockey Western Australia. Like, maybe just how'd you end up in Perth? Why Australia?
Yeah.
I guess, how is your role impacting the lives of those hockey coaches and players in Western Australia?
Yeah, West is best. I think I should say that. I feel pretty grateful to live in WA, most isolated place in the world, but the most beautiful spot as well. Just before COVID hit, had the opportunity by Jamie Dwyer, so 5-time World Player of the Year, one of the most capped Australian hockey players and coveted players in the world. And we're friends, and dropped me a message and said, there's an opportunity to come and play and do some coaching and whatever. And when the best player in the world asks you to come and play and coach, you normally have to say yes. So I said yes straight away. Ended up coming to Perth in March 2020. 2 weeks later, I didn't quite realise it was going to become an even more isolated place in the world because COVID hit, and I had to make a decision: do I stay? Do I go back to England? And I said no. I'm going to hang tight, and it's the best decision I've ever made. So yeah, coming up to almost 4.5, 5 years in WA. And in terms of hockey, probably doing less and less in the world of hockey, more in other sports, but still do a lot of bit of coach education work with Federation of International Hockey and a little bit with Hockey WA in terms of their grassroots coaches, and probably where a space that I feel we often forget about the grassroots coaches quite a bit, that without the grassroots you don't get high performance, and we've all been there in a grassroots setting. So yeah, try to devote a lot of time and energy into that space because I know I've got experiences that those guys probably want to hear and they probably want to have. So that opportunity to share some of that and upskill them to, if you help one coach, hopefully you help 50, 100 players in the lifespan of a coach. And also that retention at a grassroots level. My business plan is always, if you can retain a coach, that's better than trying to recruit a new coach every single season for a club. So if I can help one coach, I know I'm going to help that coach stay in the game for much longer.
Yeah, brilliant. And this is, I assume, where the coaching lab and MatchPlay cards come in. So we'll add all the links in the show notes so players and parents and coaches can go and check that out at a later date. But maybe just fill us in on what that is and where it started from, and how, I guess, where we are up to date.
Yeah, 7 years ago, I sat on the university desk with 20,000 words of big sports psychology language. And the question was, how do coaches develop psychological skills? The confidence, communication, adaptability, all these things that we often talk about as coaches. And then you go and see a coach in practice and they probably don't develop those skills as much as they say they do. And had all these words. And I was like, how do I make this useful? And I guess my dyslexic brain started thinking in pictures and activities rather than words, and created a set of challenge cards, multi-sport, team challenges, player challenges, some reflection questions to help coaches ask really good questions, and had zero intention of getting it to where it is now and being in business for coming up to 8 years and working with some pretty cool people around the world. So yeah, 7 years ago, I said, all right, let's translate this research from my final year study, put it into practice to help coaches, because we know coaches are short on time. We know you only know what you know. And sometimes that ability to go and learn, or that time to go and learn, I should say, is not always there for people. So creating a set of challenge cards to encourage more people to play games, which is my natural bias. To get better at the game, you need to play it. And also, particularly kids, keep asking to play games. So rather than just playing a 6v6 game and the coach chilling and grabbing a coffee on the sideline, how can we get a little bit more out of that game? And, some principles of play and a real focus to those sessions. And the cards was a concept that came from that. And the journey they've been on is pretty amazing. I think we're up to almost half the Premier League football clubs at the moment. A few AFL teams, 75 countries to date, off the top of my head. Some of the most bizarre, coolest places in the world they've gone to in almost every sport A to Z.
So without giving away too much information, I encourage people to go and check out the website and check out what these are. But predominantly the match play cards are literally what they kind of say, right? They are playing card style cards. On each card has a separate task and potentially a diagram and some words and some pictures categorized into different themes and different areas that coaches can use as part of their coaching session to draw upon a number of cards to help facilitate conversation, change the activity or session and to try and create some different behaviors from the players, as well as create reflections of their own, right? So maybe just, walk us through step by step what each of the different kind of components are. I think back to the original packs, you got the animal cards, you got the reflection cards, you got the match play cards, the gameplay cards rather. And we'll talk about the evolution of that sort of next, but maybe just, pull back the curtain, I guess, on those first three ones.
Yeah, changing behaviour is what I wrote down here is probably bang on in terms of what they're about. And we started with match play cards, so real kind of get simple concept, multi-sport, different player challenges. The coach might give one card to one team, another card to another team, and they're going to work out what they're doing. And the coach might think, actually, Gareth needs a little bit of help here and he's a bit quiet. Okay, so we're going to set him individual player challenge for that session or for that block. And then the evolution of that was the reflection cards, because we know asking questions is a great tool for coaches, but we also know coaches are, sometimes a little bit traditional in terms of ask the same questions all the time, and how can we change that stimulus and change that focus? So created 50 open questions, conversation starters for players and coaches to use in their sessions, and also parents on that card journey home. And the evolution again after that was the match play cards are great, but what is there for those younger age groups? So traditionally the first set was for 13 plus all the way through to adults, and the animal match play cards came as a byproduct of that feedback around that real kind of foundation youngster phase in terms of that year 3, 4, 5, 6, that primary school age. What is something really playful that encourages good behaviours, good interactions with the game, and actually players learn the game and the position and the concept of the principles of play without the coach necessarily telling them as well. So there's what I should always say is there's no right and there's no wrong way to do the card. It's more of a principle than a rule, and how one player interprets that might be quite different to another player, but that's not wrong, it's just different. And then the evolution of that in the past few months has been going into the world of AFL, which is probably one of the most dictatorial coaching environments I've been part of at times. And we also know it's one of the most chaotic games. So encouraging a few more coaches and teachers to play a few more games and get that communication out, get that problem solving out of players that we all know are really core skills. And yeah, the football match play cards then came out of that.
Yeah, I'll pull back the curtain on my experiences. So if we take the match play cards and we talk about pre-academy here at Melbourne Victory, where there's a pretty defined curriculum, weekly topics, and within that kind of framework of the session, there's sort of 4 or 5 components. We spoke at length around our arrival activity. So historically, players would arrive ideally 15 minutes before training. They sign in and they get started with an arrival activity almost whilst the previous session is either concluding or the coaches are finishing setting up. So that they're maximizing as much contact time as possible. So we kind of discussed, because play is a huge cornerstone of our philosophy. So we almost start with the game and end with the game. So play, coach, play. You see, well, instead of the arrival activity, which is ball mastery, which is great, but maybe every second week, could they play more games? And you got pitches set up, and they just arrive, and I arrive first. I might start ball mastery, and then Jack arrives. All right, let's play 1v1, and then Billy arrives. All right, it's 2v1, or it's winner stays on, or it's 4 players. You can build up to 2v2, and so forth and so forth. You say, why don't just shuffle up and put 4 match play cards behind each goal? My team's against your team. We're working on this one task, whatever that may be, and you give some examples of what those might be. And then once we achieve that task by, say, scoring a goal, we move on to the next layer, which is the second card, and we have this restriction or constraint. And there's no coaching needed because the cards actually act as the coach. The game is the game, and the kids are not only enjoying themselves, thriving, getting themselves warmed up, mentally tuning into what's about to come. But what we found is kids were starting to arrive 30 minutes before training because they wanted to play 30 minutes of games before the session even started. So, yeah, real world example from me, and maybe just paint the picture of what some of those match play cards would be. Give us some actual examples.
Yeah, really nice one. I'd add, like, the best bit around that was, yes, the coaches aren't actively coaching, but the skill of the coach was to select cards that relate to the theme of the session. So the cards is almost a bit of a curtain raiser and the game is a curtain raiser for what's going to come into the session. So some of those examples might be, you can only pass forward, or the value of the goal is worth the amount of players involved, or you can't pass back to the same player. Same player can't score twice in a row. It might be, if you score twice, if your team scores twice, your score's double. It might be you've only got 3 seconds in possession. It might be you have to take 4 touches before you play. It might be if you score, you have to switch goals immediately and, turn and burn style, lightning style. It might be the value of the amount of people involved is the goal. 3 people involved equals 3 goals. Little challenges like that. It might even be that I choose one player on my team. If they give the final pass leading to a goal, so the assist, the goal's worth double points, but we'll keep that secret from the other team. And they got to work out what play that is as well.
Yeah, some great examples, and I guess the beauty of going down the road of purchasing this is you get a bit of a manual and a bit of a support guide of different ways you can put these to use. Right? You said there's no right or wrong way with these. It's finding what works for you, and the session that you came down was great for me because I don't get to see every session. A couple of coaches pulled the cards out, and the response from 2 kids was, "Great, the cards are out this week," which is exactly what you want to see, right? And me as a program lead is, the kids' face lit up, and it's obviously some tangible responses there. We the other one, or the next one, was around the reflection card. So some of the more experienced and confident coaches can quite easy dig into the reflection, and we call it debrief or extra time. But I've seen it used in our programs below, so our football centre layer, with sort of less experienced coaches, and sometimes teasing out responses and reflections from junior players in particular isn't always easy. And it's sort of like a one, closed question, therefore you get a closed answer. So it's an opportunity for the coaches to have some real tangible something in front of them that they can almost literally read off, which is designed to tease out good depth of knowledge. But also you can hand out the card to the player, like upside down, like everybody take one card and then read the card out loud, or tell us what the card is and then provide your response. So it's kind of a safer, less intrusive way to put a kid on the spot. They might have, a minute to sort of digest the question and think back upon the session themselves and really provide a more detailed kind of response. What sort of, my initial reaction was the reflection card piece might be the most powerful because it's such an important, that reflection, that review at the end of session, which we gloss over quite often, but I think there's some real learnings for coaches to sort of spend a bit more time on that area.
Traditionally, reflection is something that you do if you've got 5 minutes spare at the end, but it should actually be something that you do throughout the whole session, because good reflection is ultimately just changing behaviors or influencing behaviors for when you go and do something again. Whereas if we just reflect at the end of the session and they go home in the car, actually they haven't had an opportunity to go back to the game and be better at the question you've asked them. So I always try and get that reflection into the session rather than always at the end as well. And I also think that ability to ask multiple questions. So let's say you've got 20, boys or girls at a session, putting 3 or 4 cards out and asking those kids to, peer review and have a reflection in their groups of, 3 or 4 or a group of 5 is way more impactful than the coach standing at the top asking one kid a question. It actually allows a bit of a space for multiple questions to be asked, and you again choose cards that relate to the session and the theme that you're trying to get out of it. But that ability to ask 3 or 4 questions at the same time and engage every single player in reflection, whereas we've all been in a playing situation where you sit down, you stand up in a meeting, and the coach asks one question, but it's only targeted at one person, and you just expect an answer within 2 or 3 seconds. Whereas those younger players, even adults, want 2 minutes. They want a minute to answer that question, so that more of a detailed response. The other way I love to do it is I start sessions with a question. Who's the toughest player to play against today, or how can you outplay your opponent? But don't answer that question until later on in the session. But they then know what question is going to come. So you hope the responses to those questions are both, one, physically in their performance in the session, and then 2, when they verbally tell you, they actually can recall a moment in the game because you've asked that question at the start.
Yeah, great. The third part was the animal cards, and looking through these initially, I kind of thought maybe this is pitched a little bit, I guess, younger. But I went through and pulled out probably, I reckon, close to 50%. And I thought, actually, I can use these in our A League women's environment. And why I kind of thought that, not only was our A League women's players are still trying to improve themselves. They're not the finished article. There's things to improve upon. And these cool cards and tips and tools are ways to help improve them. I remember when I was with the New Zealand under-20s, we had a centre forward, and a big part of her personal development plan was her movement, very athletic, very quick, and how can we create more opportunities for the team, but also herself through her movement. And she came up with, I need to be a little bit more like a shark, don't I? I need to be constantly on the move. Don't have to be like rapid all the time, but when I strike and pounce, I need to change my speed, and I'm off. Like, yeah, be like a shark. So it was sort of like her player task, and it was, we wrote on her script, and that helped her as part of her specific game. So that kind of linked back to being the animal. So, maybe just talk to me a little bit more around the idea of these animal cards, and are they specifically for more junior players, or do you feel that they can be used right across the continuum?
Can definitely be used across the continuum. It's the skill of the coach and the art of the coach to use all the cards that are out there at the moment to, fit that to the age and the stage of those people that you're working with. And the animal ones came about through, yes, there's some feedback on something for the younger guys, but also how can we use characters, animals, whatever you want to call it, their behaviors, and make that really visual to somebody. If you tell a kid to move like a snake, they know exactly what it is. So if you can incentivize that with some sort of bonus point, okay, can he dribble in a snake and not run in a straight line for longer than 5 meters? If you're a shark, can you win the ball back 3 times in the next minute? These sorts of things that when you say play like a shark, play like a snake, or, be an owl in the midfield, you instantly know what those behaviors are. But you tell a 3-year-old or, a 7-year-old, those younger age groups, they probably need a visual character to really incentivize that even more. And that's where that concept of using those team and player challenges around play and the social skills for those youngsters came about because we know animals really give you an objective view of this is how to move, this is how they're going to act, and their behaviours that are definitely related to how we want them to play sport.
You mentioned play. I spoke about it a few minutes ago about being the cornerstone of our youth programs, really. I know we've had lots of conversations about the value of play. Just, of recent podcast yet to come out with Dr. Craig Harrison, we will have a great conversation about play. Just want to get your thoughts, share with the audience around your experiences, your beliefs, how valuable you think play, whether it's unstructured or formalized or prescribed play actually is through your experiences as a youth expert.
Yeah, when I look back at my playing days, I didn't play enough. I progressed too quickly and played in a high league, which I thought was great, but I didn't play enough. So I reflect on that for sure. Youngsters have got to play. And then it's the skill of the coach to give them that right challenge within that environment. And I'd also look at young players in terms of where their journey in sport starts. It probably starts because they've watched Melbourne Victory, they've watched, a team play in person or on TV. They've seen somebody play. So when they come to training or they get their experience of the sport, they want to replicate that play element that they've seen. It's amazing when you go to so many places and ask coaches what's your biggest challenges, and they say, the engagement of players. And then you say to coaches when a player's most engaged, and they say, when they're playing. And then I always say, well, that gives you good feedback to probably play a few more games. And my natural bias is the game, because to get better at the game, you need to play it. And it shouldn't be, particularly youth sports, and it's probably why we get on so well, Gareth, that play shouldn't be the last thing that you do in terms of we're going to do ABC. And if you do those three things well and you're really well behaved, you earn the right to go and play a 15-minute game at the end. That's tradition, like that's what it says. Whereas if you can do some play at the start, which you shared the example of the kids are arriving on time, ahead of time to be there, and the engagement level is there. It also creates more buy-in to some of those individual skills that you want to look at in that practice, going to coach part. And then when you go and play the game, you're going to get better at something because there's a real focus to that play. And I think as coaches, sometimes in that youth space, we can rush players and we think, it must look like the adult game. And I need to do this and I need to do that. What's the rush? Like, there is no rush at all. But I just think when you ask players, and I speak to a lot of former players and players in all different sports, and you say, what did your best coaches do, or what did your best environments have? And they would all talk about play. Cricket's notorious for it, right? That whole backyard cricket concept is play. You speak to Dennis Bergkamp playing on the streets against the magic wall that he says he learned so many skills from in Holland. Playing against the wall that just bounces back. That's play. Like, it hasn't got to be 5v5, 3v3. Play is freedom and it's interaction with something else. And it's not that highly structured, element that we see probably a little bit too often in certain environments.
Yeah, I think if you're lucky, you get 15 minutes of a game at the end, because quite often that becomes 7 minutes because we're running out of lights or I've got to get off before the next team. But I think even the senior professional athletes, either in a weekly professional environment or on a senior national team camp, they come to life when there's a game element. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 4v4 game. It could be an element where there's competition, which is say a shooting exercise, for example, where there's points and you're aiming to get 20 or whatever. That's play. That has a purpose behind it. We call it, deliberate play and joyful play. But there's probably no coaching. It's space to allow athletes to thrive in the sport whilst maybe focusing on one particular or two particular parts of the game, and they're going to enjoy that, right? And as much as I do around getting to that stage, that high performance stage, which is where hopefully athletes listening are striving to get towards. It's so hard, and if you lose the love along the way, it's almost impossible. I have not come across very many, if any, high performance athletes that hate their game. There's an element of still love for it somewhere, some very obvious to see. In some, it's a little bit more hidden. But same with coaching, right? Being a high performance coach or developing the skill set to the point where you have opportunities to work within, elite environments, you have to love coaching. And if it becomes just a job and it's a chore, then you're not your best at it, and players and organizations will see that, and eventually you'll get squeezed out.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Because what's one of the things, well, two things that always drop off in high performance, or they're not high performance, but as a pathway is fun and play. They seem to be the two things that drop off the further you go up a pathway for a player to progress. But they're probably the two most important things that we all talk about. Um, but some of those senior coaches have never had the experience of how the hell do you engage a mixed ability group of 20 kids. And I think probably more people should have that experience because it comes back to fun and play. And, you mentioned it, those two things give you the love. And if you haven't got the love, no one's going to listen to you and no one's going to care what you say. So, yeah, encourage more people to have those two elements in their sessions.
Absolutely. And the tools that we've just been speaking about are just there to support and provide a different lens to maybe tap into. It's almost like adding to your toolkit, right? I can pull this one out today, or I don't need to pull it out today, or collectively we'll use it this week and go from there. One of the things we spoke about a few weeks ago when we caught up was your coach development cards, which I think is going to be, a huge game changer. There's, we kind of do it, and I have, potentially 40 coaches that work within programs that I oversee. I, truthfully, I don't have the opportunity to really invest in them, in their coaching journey, more than something that's kind of a template that they all work across, but they're all at different stages of their own development, let alone age and motivations to go beyond or happy with where they are. So I think the coach development cards will certainly help me and coaches within my system self-reflect, challenge each other. I said you can also give it to the players to answer this on behalf of the coach, so reflect on the coach's performance within that session, not just the players' performance in that session. Maybe talk to us a little bit about what's to come in 2025 around these coach development cards.
Yeah, hopefully we can nudge a few coaches to be curious learners. A coach's learning is their own responsibility, ultimately. You decide if you go and do something, and hopefully we can encourage a few more coaches to be, as I say, curious to get better, because I sometimes wonder how many coaches want to get better. But also that way of just choosing two or three things to really focus on in the session. So we ask players to have individual development plans. We give sessions objectives and all this sort of stuff. But it's amazing how many environments you go into and you ask the coach what they're trying to get better at, and they don't tell you because they don't know. So it's a nudge in that direction of, can we have some intent around why we want to do it? And also, as adults, coaches, people, we're creatures of habit. We graduate towards certain types of people. So we might gradually go towards the people that are our favourites, and we don't spend time with, the goalkeeper and the centre back, for example. Or we always deliver a team meeting in the same way. Or we always give feedback player to coach, and it's never player to player or never player to coach. It's always coach to player. So can we encourage more people to think a little bit differently, break a few traditions, break a few habits in their practice to ultimately best support the people on there? And how we see them working is, you might just choose two or three cards as a bit of a focus point through a period of time. I think the best coaches will actually ask the players for some feedback as well around what that looks like. And some questions to reflect on your own practice in a session, because we're asking players to do it, so we should be doing it. And I think the more or the quicker coaches can develop, the better players you're going to have. And if you want the best players, you've got to get better as a coach and be curious to learn.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. You mentioned a little bit earlier around some of the organisations that these MatchPlay cards are embedded in. I'll just give a little bit of a list. So Arsenal, West Ham, obviously two big football clubs in London, Rangers in Scotland, a few other professional football clubs, the Wallabies, Australian rugby team, you've got England hockey, USA field hockey, and you've done a little bit of work with the English national team as well. Just maybe fill me in on how do those come about? What sort of methodology are they applying these cards in those environments? Is there any other organizations on the horizon, or would you like other organizations potentially listening to reach out and see how that relationship can unfold?
Yeah, I would always love to talk coaching, teaching with people. So anyone that's curious to be a more games based, player led environment would definitely be curious to have a conversation with you to see how we can help you. But yeah, going back to the England one, someone pretty high profile that sure remain nameless for the podcast. Purchased some cards. It went to their address, and a couple of months later, someone slid into our DMs and asked for a phone call because they loved the cards and could see some real benefit in them. A couple of weeks later, I'm up at St George's Park, the home of England football. And in short, the grand plan at some stage is to hopefully win a trophy, which they've come pretty close to in recent years, and hoping it will get even closer. But using the cards to, number one, create a great environment for players that play the game every single day. So often going to an international camp can be quite tedious for players. They could very easily go to Dubai, but they have to go to St George's Park in the north of England when it's cold, wet, and it's just another game of football. So one of the challenges and the principles they had was, how can we make this the best experience and so different for players from the club land into this international space? And one of those things was training, and it's a real quick win. So using the cards to, rather than just play the same five-a-side game that they're going to play at their club and probably played since the age of 10, how can we add some challenges into that? And then we kind of dialed down and looked at some attributes across different countries and different teams. And we know, let's take the Germans, for example, incredibly intelligent in terms of how they play the game, and their IQ as people, but also as footballers, is incredibly high and probably a lot higher than other nations. So how can we upskill players to solve problems, work out what the opposition are doing and do something about it? How can we create communication? Also for coaches, how can we deliver sessions that look and feel like the game? How can we engage every single individual with that overriding theme of the session? So yeah, the cards had some great impact in that space across the men and the women's program, to really just influence some coaches, influence the environment in a way, and give players two things that I think are really, really important, which is choice and challenge. And I really think those two things should be in every session.
Yeah, nice. And yeah, let's see if England can bring it home eventually.
Uh, One day.
One of the parts we probably haven't touched on at all is around our parents' support. So, how can parents jump on this? How can that, away from their own team environment, is that something that parents buy for their kids and work externally to their own environments? Do you see value in that, or is it something that's really more driven through sort of team-based, club-based, coach-led environments?
Yeah, a bit of both. Definitely the reflection cards. I know a lot of parents would have bought them for the car journey home. So they're not asking, did you win today, or who was the best player? Like, there's a little bit more to it. So yeah, definitely for the parents in the car journey home. I also know some, let's say, more engaged parents have actually bought them for coaches to say thank you. Sometimes to say thank you for being a great games-based coach, and here's something that's going to help you. But also some that are a little bit more, let's say, dictatorial, a little bit more traditional in their approach, and giving them a gift of some team and player challenge cards to encourage them to play a few more games in a discreet sort of way. So yeah, I know definitely some parents have purchased them for their coaches to say thank you, but also the reflection cards for that card journey home.
Yeah, that's a great way. We put a post up an hour before the session starts each week of, here's the kind of key coaching points that your coach should hopefully be working through, and have this as a conversation starter pre the session of, especially if it's not the first or second time that a player's had this topic, maybe can you remember what this topic was about last term, what were the key learnings, but certainly designed to have that post session, that car ride home conversation, which we know is often daunting, more so from a game perspective, but certainly trying to create that open dialogue between parent and child, parent and athlete, that's more purposeful and specific around the topic or the activity or the game rather than just generic kind of, emotional waffle. So yeah, I think that's a great little way for parents to help tap into more ways to help their son or daughter.
I learned this from Arsenal, but basically, the more you speak to parents, the easier it is to have the hardest conversations, and I really buy into that. So I think for coaches, the more we speak to parents, that just becomes natural. It's so much easier to have those difficult conversations that we are probably pretty crap at times.
Absolutely. And I think, as a coach or as a program lead, um, parents almost apologize when they ring me and go, "Oh, sorry, I don't want to disturb your day." And you probably get thousands of parents calling you. Well, the reality is you're not disturbing my day because I've answered the phone. So you've got me at a time where I can talk. I'm not on the pitch. So firstly, you got me at a really good time. So well done for that. And then it's part of my job. And even if I'm just a coach, it's part of my job to get the best out of your son or daughter, but also help them
Mm.
thrive in the game. So improve, enjoy it, stay in it. So if anything that helps support those outcomes through a conversation, now you might come with some critique, or you might come with some queries or whatever, but the fact that the coaches should be open to having conversations with parents, but parents should also not feel like they are stepping on my toes as a coach. Like, there's a time and a place. Like, don't charge onto the pitch as I've started training session to have this conversation. Use your common sense is probably the easiest way to summarize that. But
Yeah.
certainly this conversation piece, parents and coaches needs to, and coaches to parents should happen more than what it does, in my opinion.
Oh, totally. Couldn't agree more for sure.
Right, Jack, let's wrap this conversation up with our rapid fire questions. So, firstly, set me and the audience question to ponder for the week.
If we started youth sport again, what would we do differently? If we had a total blank canvas and we went back 1,000 years and started again, what would we do differently?
Oh, that's a great one to chew on for the week. Outline a concept or idea from your world that we can potentially test and trial in ours.
Yeah, I would encourage play, practice, play, or play, coach, play. Just play the game more and practice something you actually need to practice rather than just doing what the rule book says. Practice something really intentional, but make sure you close that loop with more play.
Nice one. Provide us a book, movie, or podcast for parents, coaches, or athletes to listen into.
Yeah, Let My People Go Surfing, which is a guy that founded Patagonia, the clothing brand. Awesome book around just letting people be the best version of themselves and having a bigger mission than making money. It's probably why Patagonia have been so successful. Yeah, so it's such an awesome book. Let My People Go Surfing.
Brilliant. And you might as well, while we've got you, give yourself a plug for your podcast.
If you put the Coaching Lab into Spotify or Google Music, wherever you get your podcast from, the Coaching Lab will be up there and you'll be able to hear Gareth's Kiwi accent on there.
Just on the podcast. So, what are you trying to get out of your podcast? What sort of guests will people be able to listen into?
Cross code to different sports from around the world, different experiences in terms of some teachers and coaches on there. Traditionally, quite a lot of games-based coaches on there, and how they maximise in their environment, how they creating really good experiences for the people they're working with, and yeah, just helping coaches be the best version of themselves, hopefully.
Yeah, brilliant. Highly recommend it. If you had a magic wand and can wave it around and change one thing about youth sport, what would that be?
10,000 experiences over 10,000 hours. We see this concept of repetition in so many ways. Yeah, 10,000 experiences over 10,000 hours instead.
If you could have only one of those, 10,000 hours in one field or 10,000 separate experiences, because I really like this. I want to just pause on, sorry for the rapid fireness of this. Don't normally dig into these further, but yeah, like if you would compare the two or choose only one of those two, what do you think would give the end product, if we're talking about developing people for high performance, what do you think would be, this is a really good hypothetical question, right? What do you think would get more people to that higher level more often?
The experiences, because it gives you an appreciation of where you are and probably how lucky you are. I use the example of Man United. probably the most successful academy in the world in terms of production line. And they would talk about how can we give different experiences, sending players out on work experience, when they're 17, 18 to go and play for a men's team, and they have to find their own way there rather than, the big fancy club coach taking them and, you've got to clean your own boots and you've got to do this and you've got to do that for yourself rather than, always being done for you. Playing in different surfaces, playing in different countries, playing in big pitches, small pitches, playing with different age groups, playing against different teams. I think that experience provides you that opportunity to be ready for one of those experiences in the future.
Yeah, great. I've said this before on the podcast. I think my role as a program lead is to microdose our athletes and by default our coaches with all these different sets of experiences. So when it comes to the high performance crunch moment competition, they have a bank of experiences and therefore learnings to draw upon to get a better outcome and not be so stressed in the moment. But yeah, sorry for derailing the
It's good.
10,000 experiences. Love it. What's one piece of advice you were given that you can share with us?
I think I said it earlier in the podcast, but make the most of every opportunity. I've really kind of grabbed that as a concept, and I'm really grateful to everyone that lets me in the doors and picks up the phone to have a conversation. But yeah, make the most of every opportunity.
What's the one thing that you are striving for today?
Being present. I think as of the 6th of August, I think I've done about 55 flights this year. So being present where I am right now and friends and family and, going to the gym and enjoying a coffee without being on my phone and, those little things of being present is definitely what I'm trying really hard to strive for. Probably need a little more help, but yeah, striving to get there.
Nice. And finally, leave us for a quote for the week.
Live off the land, which is from the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, and that idea of just be really grounded about where you live, what you're grateful for, and where you are. There's always someone in a worse situation than you. So yeah, just love what you do and live off the land.
Awesome, mate. Hey, Jack, this has been a fantastic conversation around play, around youth development, around coaching youth athletes, around development of coaches. And we'll certainly provide the links to the MatchPlay Cards and the coaching lab, as well as the podcast in our show notes. So I encourage parents and coaches predominantly, but also athletes who might be able to learn something from those things as well. And hopefully we can share the good word with more people, because I'm an advocate for it for sure. I've seen it up front and up close and personal, the joy that our athletes are getting from these, as well as the development from them. And I'm really excited to sort of see the next stage around the evolution of the coach development as much as the players. So appreciate your time.
Awesome, Gareth. Thanks so much. And yeah, listeners, always happy to have a chat and see if we can help out. So yeah, drop us a line.
Thanks so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could hit the like or share button so we can get these amazing insights out to other like-minded coaches, athletes, and parents. Cheers.